Welcome to this podcast, the Kagiso podcast, and it's on local governance. And of course, we have local government elections on the horizon. So there are many, many issues of concern to South Africans, and the Kagiso Trust is at the forefront of this initiative of having conversations around the issues that matter. The main issue that we're going to look at today is the question of collaborative governance, and Paul Smith is in charge of the program on local government at Kagiso Trust. And Paul, pleasure to have you with us here. And in a moment, you will be explaining to us why this is important, an issue to discuss.
Thank you, Tim.
Pleasure. And Sabelo Chalufu, thanks again for joining us. And Better Governance Initiative is your organization that you founded together with other colleagues of yours, and you believe that civil society can play a better role in improving the question of governance. Is that correct?
Indeed so. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Mike Chauke, a pleasure to have you with us from South African Local Government Association, SALGA. You know all about this because you are at the forefront, the cold face of the issues facing our people, and I'm sure you will give us a sense of how local government works and what the issues are and how we can go about to resolve them. Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. Look forward to insightful discussions.
Thanks very much. And Paul, floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just to give some sort of context, Kagiso has been involved in communities for many years, and community prosperity is at front and center of our thinking. And of late, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been focusing on collaborative governance because we realized that with all the work we're doing in local government to support, it wasn't really leading to transformation within marginalized communities. And so we had to do something different in the local government space, and our trust gave us the freedom to go and investigate this. And so in our investigations and in our process of trying to understand what's hampering development locally, we believe it's the enabling environment. So the enabling environment is really is how do we get the right people to come to the table and have the right conversations about the future prosperity of small towns in South Africa. And local government is one of those key stakeholders, and so is community. And so based on that, we've been championing collaborative governance. We have developed a small model that we've shared throughout the country in some ways or other. And we've partnered with SALGA on trying to advocate for adoption of this collaborative governance model because we believe that there is capability and capacity in communities and in government to make the change that's required. And if we do manage to get that right, the outcome for many communities in South Africa will be very different. Thanks.
Well, somebody listening to you and watching this podcast will be thinking, what is collaborative governance? I mean, we've got SALGA. SALGA has got its own members and the councillors who serve there. And the only time that ordinary citizens and residents in the various communities interact with local government is when they vote. And after that, they say, well, we've got councillors that get paid. So where do we come in here? We've given them the responsibility to run government, and we go back to our normal business. The understanding, Mike, of collaborative governance from SALGA's point of view, what is that?
Thank you, Pratim. For us, it's how do we get municipalities to work with communities and community members in their own development. We believe in co-created solutions. The election process that you're talking about is but one of the avenues. There are so many other avenues we could be utilizing, and we often have left communities behind. So how do we start to ensure that communities become active participants in their own development spaces and not just leave it to municipalities, but they are part of driving the solutions, turn around the state of local government, which is in a precarious position at the moment. But we do believe that if we work closely with communities, civic society organizations, municipalities can change the picture. And it's collaborative practices like this that are fundamental, ensuring developmental local government is not only spoken about, but it's actually realized on the ground. We can only do it through partnerships, not government working by themselves in silos, but a bottom-up approach in terms of how do we cudgel members of the public to be active participants in their own development, coming up with solutions.
A lot of people might turn around and say to you, yeah, well, it sounds great, but it's like wishful thinking. on your part and other people who are interested in this topic and would like to see things improve, and some of us may agree with them on the basis of that there's a lot of gatekeeping in politics, right? If you are a member of a civil society or community organization and you want a meeting with local councillor, for instance, the local councillor may refuse to come and because they think you want to take over their position, including the same community organizations and NGOs, for instance. They might be coming in to interfere. I think those are the suspicions that permeate the space. Sabir, what do you think about that? That the idea is good, but the implementation is difficult, partly because of gatekeeping and other factors.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why institutions and specifically structures of governance might resist engagement with residents and society generally. And on one part, yes, one might say that there's an element of gatekeeping, but there's also fear, oftentimes, really, and a distrust, to say, well, you are coming here to play, you say you want to play your part, but are you not overstepping? It's one of the things, at least, that government, we have observed, is battling with a lot of civil society organizations. We haven't had that with ourselves, at least as an organization, thankfully, and we have also been in a position where we have assessed and identified that part of the problem is, as Michael so eloquently puts it, that our communities are not involved in these processes. And on our side, we've assessed that it's also an issue of information. They are not sufficiently informed about what's happening, and they are not sufficiently empowered to engage these processes. And the mechanisms by which they ought to do so at times are not accessible. And so we have then engaged and entered the space to close that gap, to bring people to power and processes. And what we have been able to do has proven, at least disproven, the one part of your question around the anxiety about whether or not, if I do engage, will it result in the kind of change that I would like to see. We have been able to do that specifically now with the process for the review of the white paper on local government, where we have specifically informed residents, empowered them with the platform, and facilitated the engagement with the process. And the outcome of that is what we have seen is their proposals to government about the kinds of reforms that ought to be considered and implemented are finding expression in government's thinking about the solutions. And we have seen that at the local government in Ndaba, post our submissions. So at least for those 347 South Africans who participated in our process, to input into that process, they can now speak affirmatively that I can meaningfully engage these processes and drive the kind of change that I want to see. And we want to now replicate that in other spaces as well. Because ultimately, this democracy of ours and the society that we want is not going to happen on its own. We are going to be the ones who must co-create it with government and other partners.
Well, Paul, you've been involved in this space for a while, and you've had successes, and I'm sure there's been disappointment along the way. But where has collaborative governance worked, which you think could serve as a model, or at least the concept that you have in mind that if we did things this way, that way, these are the outcomes that will be produced?
Yeah, so Tim, collaborative governance has multiple layers. So there's collaborative governance within the municipal institution, and there's collaborative governance within community and civil society, and then there's collaborative governance between the two. So there's multiple examples of where collaborative governance has played a big role, and most of the examples seem to be within community, where organizations have come together to augment and to fix and to address some of the failures of government. But and very seldom have we come across where collaborative governance between local government and community has been really successful. And yes, there are some emerging projects around the country where local government is starting to realize their important role in building this collaborative environment. And we've said to Salga and Michael and everybody we've spoken to about collaborative governance that we believe government is in a strong position to actually lead this process and lead it properly and lead it quickly. So change is very quick if government adopts the collaborative approach to local development. Because in community, we find, although they're polarized to a large extent, we find that when government shows collaborative intent, community is happy to jump on board very quickly. So there's lots of examples of that around. And we must understand that also from our experience that the two factors that are going to influence collaborative governance locally the most are political will, and the second is our ability to be collaborative as a society.
Political will, meaning what?
So political will is both community leadership and local government leadership or government leadership. We have to have the political will to transform and start deep sensing where we've gone wrong and understanding what needs to change. And once we do that, we can adopt the skills that are required for collaborative governance. And there's 5 key principles, and I can get to that a bit later. But once we adopt a collaborative approach to things, and we're happy to see ourselves being vulnerable in our environment, and take the opportunity to deep sense some of the issues that are there, we can find amicable solutions. And people are willing to come to the table to do that. But I think it being led by civil society or to be led by government have 2 different outcomes. If government leaders will be quick. If civil society leader, it could be very disruptive. So we need government to come to the table. It's really important.
But here's the thing, all right? And Michael, I should pose the question to you, coming from Salga, that in some instances, levels of trust are very low in the various communities. Doesn't matter whether, there's government, and by government, Paul, I understand you to mean local government, right?
That's right.
So that the levels of trust are relatively low, I think, compared to, let's say, provincial, or for that matter, even a national government. Or do people trust their local governments?
I think there's a trust deficit, and we need to be honest about that. And part of what collaboration does is to ensure that we start talking to each other to rebuild the trust. And it's not going to be an easy process. It's going to require both sides to come around the table and to ensure that we start to mend those relations, because we can't talk about working together if we always looking over our shoulders. So it requires mechanisms for trust building and for a new change in terms of a nuanced way of engaging with communities, because we cannot use the same tools that have gotten here where we are talking about the trust deficit to get us out of the same hole that we have dug ourselves into. So it requires a different way in terms of how do we bring government on the one side and how do we bring communities to start and working and talking to each other and looking at building the fragmented relations that are there. Because if we say we want to move forward, yet we're still harking back on what has not worked and why are we here, it's not going to work. So we need to create environments within our institutions that open up the space for community members to want to work with us, but also for us to be receptive of the efforts that communities are doing. As Paul has stated earlier on, there are pockets where communities have gotten up and started doing initiatives for themselves. Mm-hmm. And how do we leverage from those community-led initiatives to start to showcase a ripple effect that can happen across society if we partner between government at a local government level as well as communities on the other hand?
I would suggest, Sabelo, you please respond to this question, that part of the problem, as much as we can talk about political will and so on, is that the political party system could be a problem, in the sense that in the lead up to elections of councillors, the divisions in the communities are exploited by the different parties. Mm-hmm. And there's also intra-party fighting in some instances that leads to a situation where somebody gets elected as councillor, then a particular group of people, a faction in a party or a section of society, of community, rises up against the particular person, irrespective of performance of that particular municipality. How do you overcome that? Or, should we change the system as it obtains?
We haven't asked community members that yet.
Yeah.
And I suppose that is a question that we can take and ought to take to them, to say, well, given the challenges that we see with our engagement with political parties, is there a different and better model that we could use? So I don't have a direct answer for that in that sense. Yet, I will have it before long. My thinking, though, having engaged community members on issues related to the system, one of the things that we've picked up, and is one of the things that I was sharing with us before we started having this conversation here, that there is an enmeshment with society, and in particular, for instance, the ANC, right? And over time, society has been saying it wants to move away from that and have the organization exist on its own and to help society move forward, but also society wants to have other ways of progressing. And one of the things that we are battling with is that delinking of the organization and the people. I do suspect that it's going to take us a while to get there. And one of the things that we are battling with is, for want of a better way, there's an element of a lack of leadership, as a country, that we are battling with in that space. But to the extent that now we must think about that in the context of governance, to our mind, it is what becomes important where we come in is to say we need an electorate and a community that is sufficiently empowered to co-create the society that it wants alongside the political parties and with government. It can't be that the community externalizes its responsibility. And in fact, it's part of the externalization of the responsibility that has led us to where we are now. The community needs to take its power and say, here's what we want. And how do you then, as political parties, all of you, and as government, take us into that better place?
Tim, can I just give a contribution to that?
Yeah, sure,
response,
please. Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I know I'm chipping in here, but from a Kagiso perspective, what we've come to realize, and it's also been an outcome from the white paper, is that we have a people problem. It's not so much a systems problem or a capability or capacity problem. It's a people problem.
What do you mean by that?
If we put the wrong people in positions of power, it doesn't matter what legislation or policy we write, we're going to get a bad result. And so we have to, and Sabelo mentioned the importance of leadership. Our institutions are failing because our leaders are failing. And so we have to focus on the integrity and the quality of our leadership, and we have to repurpose those local government organizations to become driven to excellence and performance, and also to be community centric. So we're looking ultimately for behavior change.
Yeah.
We're not looking, I don't think that policy change or system change, it will make a difference, and there are gaps that can be filled there. But I think the biggest change is putting the right people, and building up to the next elections. Communities have to start thinking carefully about who they want to represent their interests.
Whilst you're still there, I want to ask you a question then, Paul. What is it then that makes communities make the mistake, if you will, of electing the wrong people to top positions?
Yeah, so there's two things. So I think Michael will be able to help us out here a bit more. But there's proportional representative councillors, which really shift the dominance of council in one direction or another. And then there's ward councillors. So in our view, the ward councillors are still reasonably authentically elected, but proportional representative councillors aren't. And many of those councillors don't even reside in the towns that they're representing. And some of them end up on mayoral committees and mayors and etc. So I think what Sabelo raised early on, we're still in a party political space as communities, and we need to shift beyond that. And I see the shift because I think the GNU has provided sufficient good signs in terms of the budget and how the economy is planned to grow and deal with debt and how parties are relating to each other there. And I think that is, whether we like it or not, going to filter down into the local government elections. So we have cohesive, or what do you call it, councils, split councils, that are going to come together. So people are going to have to work together. And so our communities now to think more carefully about who they want to stand up and represent them in terms of their own development, because that's the beauty of democracy. We get the government we elect.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's, as communities, think about that, and let's make sure we get the government we need and elect to do what's right for community. Yeah.
Michael, I'm curious to find out from you what Salga thinks about this idea that we have a people problem, right? And what you as Salga are doing, the initiatives you may have to make sure that the people of the right character and the capabilities are elected. Are there any initiatives in that direction?
Yes, fundamentally, we are talking to political parties to reflect on the kind of people they're going to send into local government. Because local government is inherently complex environment to work when over legislated, over regulated. So you need people with the right capabilities. And if the parties themselves are not going to change in terms of how they nominate people to stand for elections, it's got a direct bearing on local government. It will probably take those people well over 2 years to understand just what is going on in local government, and by that time 2 years down the line, the term is almost at a midpoint. So we need political parties to send us potential councillors who've got capabilities, who are well experienced, and also to reflect on how they can retain those that are within the system already, so that we're not always starting from ground zero, because we do a lot of investments in capacitating councillors and officials in local government, but is there a return? So does it lead to change management in the municipalities at the institutional level, so that it's fundamentally looking to address the governance processes, whether they can be effective in their roles and responsibilities. But if the political parties are not sending capabilities that are correct, as well as you can have the capabilities, but if you're an ethical person, you're not going to do what is in the best interest of communities. You're going to be about self-enrichment,
Sure.
self-gain, and that is something we're looking for.
I'm actually interested in that part, that you can establish whether a person is qualified or not, etc. But when it comes to moral, ethical character, how do you measure that? How do you establish that?
I think you can't really measure it, but there are processes that we're trying to put in place. For one of the projects we're involved in is the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, where we've developed a code of ethical leadership for local government. Inherently, it provides us with principles that ethical leaders, both officials and politicians, should be adhering by. So it's like a king code for the sector, and we're trying to drive those processes, that we start talking to the inherent values that are within people, so that they can reflect back towards, are they actually steward leaders who are there not for self-gain, but are there on behalf of communities. They are acting on behalf of the shareholders, for the betterment of those, because local government is intimately involved in people's lives. If we don't get it right through ethical leadership, it's got a direct bearing on people's lives. And when the democratic dividend is not enjoyed by people, they're going to be disenfranchised. They don't want to participate, and this is what we're trying to rework, so that people want to participate, and they can see this by having leaders who are there, interested in changing their lives, who are ethical, and it will have a ripple effect within society, where the leaders are setting the tone. And as the English idiom says, a fish rolls from the head. So if the leadership is not setting the tone, it will showcase across society.
I want to go back to Paul. Earlier you suggested that if some of the collaborative governance initiatives were led by civil society, they will have serious shortcomings. Why is that? How do you overcome that problem? I mean, political will reside obviously in the leadership, as Michael has just said, the political leadership and the political will that you spoke about earlier. But when it comes to civil society taking the lead, why is that a challenge? Why would it be?
A lot of the resources that are required for local development reside with council. And a lot of the funding for development also resides with council. So we've seen projects around the country in various municipalities led by civil society that have had an impact. It's a limited impact, and it's for a short period of time because the money runs out, because civil society can't adopt the mandate of local government. Local government has to do their work, and civil society has to do their work. Business has to create jobs. Municipalities don't create jobs. And so we have to get the synergy right between the two. And so if municipalities can create the enabling environment and civil society can do their job, I think we're in a better space to make the right decisions that are sustainable going forward. But civil society is also not cohesive. So when civil society takes challenges local government, often it's politically led by people who are not currently in power and looking for the opportunity to use community to get into power. So we have to also guard against that, because that also derails the possibility of any collaboration. But, you know, in terms of accountability, as Michael was talking to, if we get collaborative governance right and community plays their rightful role, as Sabella was also indicating, the levels of accountability are elevated. Community can now hold their position, but they have to get organized to do that, and they can hold government to account. And funny enough, in places that we've been to where government has come to the table, we find that government officials have dialed up sufficiently to make a big difference just because community are involved. And so it's changed the whole landscape. And the other thing is, if government wants to get credibility and trust back, they have to show action. They can no longer talk about what they want to do. They actually have to do what they say they're going to do. And that will bring credibility back. When people see a government fixing a pothole, a local government official, they're immediately on board. How can we help? And they're very forgiving. So I think that's why it'll be such a faster and an easier route for government to lead this process as opposed to civil society.
I want to ask
And I
you.
think,
Yeah, sure.
So you know, Paul said something, and it moves me, specifically around the potential political incentive for civil society actors. It's one of the challenges that we see and have also been confronted with, that from our side as an organization, we're saying, no, we want to bring residents, citizens to processes, and we want to empower you to be able to influence these decisions that affect your life. One of the natural then inclinations of people as they engage this is to say, okay, yes, we are seeing that, we are participating and we're doing all of this, which is great, but we like the fact that you are leading this. You are leading us there. Then they want to then, and one might even say possibly innocently, one might then want to say, well, you should be there then. You should raise your hand to be a leader in government. And, you know, for us then, we have then a tension to say, no, that's not why we are here. That's not why we are here. But it tells you that that lack of leadership is so deep that when somebody gets an inclination of leadership, they want more of it. And from that specific actor. And then the incentive, or the perverse incentive that some in our society have then, you know, allowed themselves to fall into, is to then actually take that desire from the community and then apply it for themselves, and in fact then seek office. And once they mutate from the non-partisan and non-electoral agenda into one that is partisan and electoral, they then actually lose the trust of the residents. Oftentimes, yes, they might have sufficient supporters to be able to gain a seat, but as an institution, they typically then would lose trust. But also, as a sector for ourselves, as civil society, that does hamper us, because then even those structures of governance then start to look at the rest of us.
I hear you guys, you're talking, it's great talk, but what's in it for me as a member of the community who wants things to improve, and I'm not in a leadership position. On the other hand, the person who's mobilizing the right way, interacting with other people for the betterment of
And
the
achieving wins.
Yeah, yeah. And says, I'm doing the work, but I'm not getting paid for it. I'm not getting any benefit. It's the Salga people, the councillors,
The members of the members.
the members of the members who seem to be getting all the personal rewards, at least, the
Yes.
incentives for the work that I have contributed to as a leader of civil society.
I suppose the issue of reward is quite a significant one. And it also does, in fact, inspire what people then do. It's one of the things that, funny enough, I was talking to my team about, to say, if we want people to partner with us, other organizations in the sector and so on to partner with us, we need to also be telling a positive story about to what extent partnering with us is good for you.
Yeah.
So it's not just, I would like to partner with you because I think you guys are great. No, it's not that you're great. It's that there is something that we align on and that has a sufficient reward for your mission as well in what we're doing. Similarly, then, even with residents, what we saw and what we have seen in the work that we have done is it's not that people don't want to engage public processes. It's not that they don't want to co-create that better society that they want. It is that they don't, when government is saying, here's a process, the review of the white paper, it is not immediately obvious to a resident why engaging in that process is positive for them. Thus, then, where we come in is to help them understand that, internalize it, and be able to respond to it meaningfully. And that then means we must inform them. That means we must communicate and educate them. We must communicate with them and educate them on the fact of, how engaging in this process is good for you and has particular rewards for you. Then there's the last part about ourselves as an organization to say, well, what's in it for us? Well, we on our own have set ourselves this lofty goal of strengthening democracy through empowering residents to engage in these processes and so on. But we have two then twin peaks, which is on the one hand, it's governance, that's part of our name. And on the other hand, it's elements that speak to the democratic dividend. And those, frankly, do speak to the economy and how the economy is structured and to what end some of our governance decisions are made. And so when then we have engaged in some of these other processes, for instance, with our petition on the DTIC credit regulations, it was with that in mind to say, yes, we must engage this governance process because we have a view about how it is, what kind of society we want to have, and the kinds of conditions and regulatory framework that might enable that creation of that society. And thus, inputting into this process helps us to actually reach that end. And part of that end then is about, do we have more jobs? Are more jobs being created in the economy? Is the credit and regulatory environment enabling, people to access economic opportunities? And so to what end? So then, how do we bring residents to engage those? Because what we want is ultimately that better society in which we all thrive.
Yeah, and the issues at local government predominantly are socio-economic in nature, right? And of course, the delivery of certain services, but it's the lack of that delivery of services that impacts on the socio-economic conditions of a community, meaning that businesses then choose not to invest in those communities. There's an example in the Northwest where a big employer had to leave because they were having... Lichtenberg, yeah. They had to leave because they were having water problems, and I think even the roads were bad, and the particular company offered to fix the roads, but expected the municipality to sort out the water problem, which was never fixed, and over 400 people lost jobs. Is there a better way in which, Paul, you think that community could have resolved the problem?
So, community has to, and I mean, when I say community, I'm talking about the broader community, residents, business forums, civil society, NGOs, and community-based organizations needs to organize themselves and come together and elect what they may want to call a community task team to represent the community at multiple levels in terms of prosperity. So what's happened in those organizations to a large extent, I would think, and I've seen it in other cases as well, is that individual businesses are trying to fight the battle on their own. And it's actually not good enough. And so we have to change our mentality. So businesses and communities and leaders need to shift from being very egocentric about so the fixing of the potholes in the water shouldn't be primarily a business objective. It is a business objective for the business and very important one, but it should be a issue for the entire community, prosperity. If we get the mindset right of shifting from egocentric objectives to what we've got to do and involving broader community to an ecosystem-centric approach, what's good for the greater community, and get community to support those initiatives, I think it'll have a greater impact on the local politics and the local administration. So and that's why we're advocating that communities actually organize themselves. Local government can't engage 80,000 people and co-create solutions. It's impossible. But they can co-create with 10 mandated people to help that are there in the interest of the greater purpose of community to engage on a co-creation of local development, as long as those people are ecosystem-centric, worried about the greater good of the community and don't drive their own agendas. Then we have something that I think can work going forward. So if we had to say, where do communities start? Start organizing yourself. Make sure you're not led by narcissistic leaders that have personal agendas and objectives to champion, but people who really feel the need of the greater good of community. Because I've seen many cases when businesses, even smaller businesses like restaurants, have had to close down, not because they haven't got services, because they've put a borehole down, they've put solar on their roofs, they've got gas stoves in their restaurant, but their patrons leave town.
Yeah.
So for businesses to thrive locally, the greater community has to thrive.
Mike, perspectives from Salga on this particular point?
Now, for us, it talks about how municipalities must start developing stakeholder mapping processes, where you are able to identify the various stakeholders within your constituency and create those opportunities for engagement. Because, as Paul is correctly saying, if you talk to stakeholders around their own issues, you are likely to find co-created solutions based on the interest that we both have over resolving those challenges. Rather than you bring us all in a hole, it ends up being a complaint exercise. So the way we want to do things differently is identify those stakeholders who've got a constituency that they are representing, and they can take back their messaging. You are likely to drive development in a more positive manner in that form, because we're all working towards the same direction. And you can even have multi-stakeholder forums where you're even bringing other stakeholders, so that you're not just talking to one constituency, but a multiplicity of constituencies around the work that local government is doing. Get the buy-in, move from a government-led top-down approach, but have both ways, both bottom-up and top-down. Because some of the solutions that some of the challenges that are sitting within communities have got solutions to those challenges, and we can't always expect government to have solutions.
Sure.
So how do we start to incentivize communities to want to participate, to want to come up with solutions and create those platforms? Some of it might want us to move away from the bureaucracy within government and allow for creative solutions to be able to come up despite the institutional barriers that might be there, so that we also focus on ensuring that the right people, professionals, are employed in local government that can change the situation, not people who are just there because they need a salary, but people who want to actually make a positive contribution to the betterment of society.
Probably we do have examples of what we're talking about, which we can learn from, right, being implemented. Are there any case studies in the Salga context which you, together with your colleagues, have been involved in, and you have seen those initiatives bearing the results that we all desire?
There are significant examples. One example I can hark back on. During COVID times, there was a community in an informal settlement where there was a lot of dirt in the neighborhood. Young people in that community took it upon themselves to organize themselves to clean up around them, and it had a positive effect on the community itself. So we can leverage from those kind of initiatives, whether however small they are, where people actually want to do and contribute for the betterment, leverage from those kind of initiatives, work with those communities, and hopefully it has got a ripple effect in others communities where people will want to do it for themselves. And through those kind of platforms where you can even have upscaling of those refuge collection processes, and how can they derive some income from that, where it will make it easier and more sustainable for community-led initiatives to be sustainable in the future, rather than coming up with solutions where people are not interested in those initiatives themselves.
I want to
Tim,
take
sorry, can I just add to that, just before you ask the next question?
Yes.
I think my advice from our experience to government, local government, when they start implementing this collaborative environment, is often, and it's probably been the downfall of the ward committee system, where it's been government selected. And so when you're creating a community task team to work with government, it's not the job of government to select that task team. It's government's task to facilitate the self-selection of that team by community for community, to make decisions on behalf of community. So don't pre-impose your own cadres or candidates in there, because that will just disrupt the process. So often we see the initiative is with good intentions, but when you are selecting as well, you player and referee in the same game, and it just dismantles the trust that should be created in that space. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the forthcoming local government elections give residents, community members, an opportunity then to test some of the ideas that we are talking about here. And listening to you carefully, I get a sense that the more there is empowerment to the communities, the more we'll have transformation that improves the quality of lives of those communities. Am I correct? So where would the empowerment, just talk me through how you see this happening. As you know, if you're the community member and they are contemplating your vote going forward and your role anyway in improving your community, how should we think like when we look at the issues confronting us?
So for us, we think about this from saying that oftentimes there's an assumption that communities don't know what they want. And that assumption is wholly unfounded. Communities do know what they want. What often then becomes the problem is that the system is unresponsive to community needs and desires. And it is that unresponsiveness that then leads to a disconnect between the leaders and the led. And so it's one of the things that we are working through to say, well, how do we ensure that we can properly bring these community demands and desires to the conversation and elevate those and have the people who want the support of the community to respond to those. In a few months' time, parties are going to impose or inform us of what they believe communities want. One of the questions that we are thinking about is, to what extent are those things that they are offering things that the community has said they want? The reality is that even when we think then about the competence of the people we will elect, one of the things that we cannot discount is that to be elected already demonstrates that you do have some competence, and that competence is the competence to gain the support of others, to persuade the others. What we then need to solve for is how then do we ensure that when you are inside there, that you are driving a particular program of equitable development, development of a capable state, such that it enables us to realize our objectives of a better society. That is one of the problems that we are occupied with, that we can accept that there may be pre-electoral incompetence, but post-election there needs to be competence, either that you bring from your own space, but also that we empower you. That does the system empower you to ensure that you are able to effectively do your job? For us, that all of these things become critical, and unfortunately or fortunately, citizens are central in that space. And we believe that they should have a voice, and we as an organization and as a sector are specifically then, engaged in in process.
Tim,
Well,
so
yeah, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I would like to respond here
Yes.
as well. When we started this process in Kagiso, we found that, and I mentioned it early on, that it was the enabling environment that was a problem. So the solution, the solution we need to find is got to be based on the fact that we can't predict the future. And so we have to build capabilities in our institutions and communities that can deal with any possibility going forward. And that means that if we create an enabling environment, any issue that arises, including the current issues, can be amicably resolved between all the parties. Because I find that sometimes we're preoccupied with an insular issue in community and in our local government. And whilst we focused on a particular issue, the environment around us is collapsing. And so Michael mentioned it earlier on that there's multiple forums that can be created to deal with multiple issues. But if we make the issue the key thing that we're trying to deal with, we forget about the long-term capability that we need to create as an environment to solve any issue going forward. And so we're advocating get your house in order and then deal with the issues. But it also means that to build trust relationships, you have to have those small projects that gives people a place to practice a new relationship and a new way of engaging and a new trust level and a new respect level. So we have to have small projects. So there is space for small projects, but let's not forget the bigger picture. We need a better relationship between community and government. We need to narrow the gap that currently exists going into years of future. We're looking to do this forever, because these issues we're facing now are not going to be the last issues.
And Michael, is there a possibility for what Paul is talking about? And if there is, my question would be, why is it not being done? Maybe it is from sharing ideas like we are doing now that collaborative governance can be built, and maybe it was not contemplated previously, but here we are now. From experience, we know that we need to improve the situation in our communities, and the proposed solution at this time is that of collaborative governance.
Yes, there is opportunities for that. It starts off by us having these kind of discussions, as well as also being intentional in what we want, the outcomes. One of the drawbacks we've seen is the lack of civic education, where community members have not understood at times the role and responsibilities of local government. And if you look at some of the protests, some of the things communities protest about are not necessarily a local government competency, but because local government is the closest sphere of government to citizens, they often bring about their frustrations at a local government level by burning down the infrastructure of a municipality. So how do we invest in civic education to get people to understand how they can be involved, the opportunities for involvement, and also at a government level, how municipalities can transform the way they have always done the traditional bottom-up approach, gathering communities into a whole, which has not shown to be as successful. Because as I stated earlier on, it becomes a complaint exercise. But how do we have more nuanced processes of engagement where there's buy-in from both sides? And also what's critical in this is how do we have trade-offs? Sabelo stated earlier on that communities would know what they want, but they might know what they want, but do municipalities have the resources to provide for that? And how do we find each other? How do we provide trade-offs in those spaces? So this kind of approach should allow for those kind of mechanisms, as well as a loop back processes where we could say the road you wanted, we can only provide it in 3-4 years time. However, in the meantime, we're going to provide this particular solution that you also need, and we've got the resources at this time and place. So it creates those kind of processes, a two-way consultation process. We're not saying this is what we're going to do for you as government, but how do we have those trade-offs, buy-in and consultation processes open up the space?
I get a sense in this discussion that collaborative governance is possible and is beneficial. As we conclude, I'd like us to share thoughts on how we get to that point, the practical things that can be done. And somehow I'm of the view that smaller municipalities seem like more capable of achieving this than the bigger metros. That's the sense I have. But let's share thoughts. From the BGI point of view, where would you start? How would you go about it? Because those who have not reached that point yet probably are envious of those communities that have tried it and it's working for them.
Thank you. You know, when we speak about communities organizing themselves, it is natural to assume that they are not organized. And in many instances, they are not organized. But there are others where they are. And where they are is where then you also see the government responding to them and them then co-creating the better circumstances. And these typically, from our observation, is they are in the more upper income areas. And in the lower income areas, they are not as organized. And they are also not as empowered. When they are organized, they're not as empowered with the tools for how to drive the change that they want. And so for us, we then see gaps in those kinds of spaces. And we believe that if we do educate people, if we empower them with the tools, they can create the society that they want with government. And our experience has been, when we have done that in our tools and our campaigns, when we have done exactly that, they have responded in that way, and this has resulted in the kind of change that they want. We saw it in the survey on the municipalities. Their inputs are now finding expression into government's thinking on the new white paper. We saw it with government's response to those who opposed the DTIC credit regulations. Again, it demonstrated to those people and others in society broadly that if we do come to these processes, we can create it. And so doing it and replicating it over and over again naturally then has the further impact of influencing others to better engage.
Paul, together with your organization, Kagiso Trust, have been on this journey for quite a while, and you're very passionate about it, which means you are confident that it can be achieved. Let's be practical about it for those who've not encountered your approach, your organization to collaborative governance. Where should communities start, or where can they start at least?
So communities can start by electing the right people, and that's a difficult thing in its own right, but I won't elaborate. We have spoken about that. The second thing is I think communities need to be coherent and collaborative in their own right and get themselves organized. And then I think, and I just want to relate a story at this point. The Makana Circle of Unity hosted an education summit locally of 300 volunteers that gave up their weekend to come and talk about equal education in the region. The conversation went like this. The well-resourced schools said they needed more smart technology to improve the quality of education. The less resourced schools said, we don't even know which of our children have learning disabilities. The ultimate conclusion of that discussion was that the resource schools would provide a mobile vehicle to go around and assist the under-resourced schools to identify and help resolve some of those issues. So the moral of the story is, if we don't come together and share our lived experience about our environment and come to a collective conclusion that's for the greater good of community, we will always be championing our own egocentric outcomes. So in order to do this, we also have to adopt a certain posture as individuals, and communities must do this as well, and including government. We must be non-defensive about our own opinion and be more curious about others' lived experiences to deep sense some of the problems that we're having. Once we've done that, we must come together and negotiate with the idea of building a collaborative environment, to always negotiate with the intention of strengthening relationships. We must be self-accountable for what we must do, what we say we're going to do. We must be self-conscious and aware of others, self-awareness. We must know what our triggers are, what our emotions are, our feelings are, what our learnt experiences taught us, and be open to other people's learnt experiences. And then we must always act in a collaborative manner under all circumstances.
Sure. Michael, Salga open to this, and you are very much involved personally in some of these initiatives. Where would you start? And ahead of the elections, how should communities start thinking about collaborative governance?
I think we must not be afraid of failure. We must be open and responsive to doing things differently, and in that we will learn. The opportunities where in the learning process, we might fail, but we must open up those opportunities, do things differently. If we don't, we'll keep digging ourselves into this hole, and we need to get out of the hole, create avenues for participation of communities, encourage what is one of the objects of local government, the involvement of communities and community organizations in local government. We must not be afraid to work with civil society. They've got a presence in grassroots level. How do we leverage from their capabilities, their capacities, and their funding for the betterment of our citizens on the ground? Ultimately, when the citizens are happy, they'll see the good work that local government is doing, and it will be sustainable in that manner. We can't do it alone as local government. We can only go so far. But with the help of communities themselves, civil society, we can even go further and ensure that everyone gets to enjoy the fruits of our hard-won democracy.
Thanks very much, Michael. And gentlemen, thanks very much. I learned a lot, and I'm buying the story, even though it's a mountain to climb, though. But an initiative of this nature has got to start somewhere. Thanks, Michael. Paul, thank you very much. And Sabelo, much appreciated. The discussion was about collaborative governance and the benefits that communities will reap if we find ways and means of building those type of systems and approaches. And by the way, they do not happen by themselves. It takes inspired people, inspired leadership to come up with solutions that will help improve our living conditions. This episode was brought to you by Kagiso Trust. And from me, Tim Modise, thank you.